everybody that's listening, thanks so much for listening to Fire Breathing Rob. If you're listening to us on YouTube, we've been really building on that. So thanks so much. Please subscribe, like, and share these videos. Today, we're going to be talking to two guys that live in Montreal, and they know a lot about the Montreal Expos, which I was a huge fan of when I was growing up, going to see guys like Jose Vidro, Vladimir Guerrero, Javier Vasquez, Tim Raines at the time. I mean, there's so many guys. I'm not going to go down the list. We'll be here for 2 or 3 hours naming off all the great Expos players. But this is Matthew Ross and also Annakin. How do I say your name, Annakin?
Annakin Slayd.
Slayd. Okay, that's easy.
Just some funky spelling to go with this.
All right. So Matthew Ross and Annakin Slayd, and they're going to be talking about Montreal. So first of all, guys, thanks for coming on the program. Greatly appreciate the time today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, no problem. Apologies for the echo and the empty background. I just moved into my new house, so there's a lot of empty rooms.
No worries. No worries, Matt. So let's talk about this. So before we even get into Expos history, you guys did start ExposNation. Well, can we talk about that, Matt, and how you got that started?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the genesis of it was the early 2010s. André Dawson got inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 2010, and that's right around where when I met Annakin. I had him in studio on my radio show to talk about a hockey song that he had created, and we kind of found out that we both liked baseball and grew up, more so of Expos fans than Canadiens fans. So we kind of bonded over that, and then in 2012, we formed a nonprofit corporation called Nos Amours Baseball Incorporated, but it's known affectionately as ExposNation, ExposNation.com. And way back then, it was really a movement in its infancy. Former Expo Warren Cromartie kind of started to talk about things locally, saying, "Hey, there's nothing to remember the Expos here locally." You can't go somewhere and see something Expos. And I think it was 2012 that when Gary Carter died. Was it 2012? Yeah, 2012. Yeah. And so we started in 2012 trying to make a little noise. And in the September of 2012, we brought 200 fans to Toronto to see a baseball game. We all sat in the same section. We had Jim Fanning with us, the first Expos GM. And the idea behind it was actually that Vladimir Guerrero had signed with the Blue Jays that year and was in the minors. And we assumed he'd get a call up in September and be perfect timing. He'd be there, and we'd have a whole bunch of guys from Montreal. He subsequently, after he went, I think 3 for 4 with a triple, got his average up to 300. He subsequently quit because they wouldn't call him up. And so we were all kind of disappointed, but we said, let's do it anyway. And we had a lot of fun, and then the movement kind of grew from there. We brought 1,000 fans to Toronto the following year in July of 2013, and that got the attention of ESPN, the magazine, the Prime Minister Harper at the time, the opposition leader Justin Trudeau. So we really kind of got on people's radars and did a couple of small things locally, and kind of became, I guess, a resource and a rallying kind of group for the return of baseball as it began to make its mark here locally, as other events happened, as other things, transpired, like Tim Raines going in the Baseball Hall of Fame and some of these other things. And then obviously the mantle was taken, we did something modest, but then obviously Stephen Brofman and his group came in and they've really done something. I don't know what you want to add there, Annakin.
No, I think you pretty much nailed it. We basically, we felt a sort of groundswell, especially after Gary Carter died, and we figured that it was time to show, the baseball world that there may not have been as few fans as people might perceive, and so we wanted to kind of expose that element in the hopes, which seemed a complete long shot at the time, that this would get enough momentum to encourage the big money people to come in and make a legit pitch, which seems to have ended up happening. So yeah, and Matthew and I mostly work together on I mean, Matthew's more the brains. I'm kind of just the guy who throws ideas in there. He runs the whole thing. But we ended up doing some fun stuff, especially that trip to Toronto, which ended up being way bigger than we had initially imagined. It ended up being what it was. You said 2,000, right?
No, it was about 1,000 fans, which
yeah.
in and of itself is insane. And we had actually, we remember we had a former Expo with us, Bill Atkinson, a Canadian who played like 3 years with the team too. He was in our kind of our group, and we, you know, for Tim Raines, we brought 3 buses to Cooperstown a few years ago, 2017, and that was just an incredible weekend. A lot of fun, amazing things, stories and things happened that time. And we, in the process, we've done some fun things. We've worked with the Bronfman Group on helping them get their feasibility, their surveys out, to have focus groups. We've helped the local promoter Evenco when they've done the Blue Jays preseason games up here the last few years. So we've helped to sell tickets for that. So we've played a small role in a lot of interesting little things here along the way.
So with that said, and I do want to go back in a second and talk about Expos history in general, but since you talked about the group that's trying to get the Expos back in Montreal, what is the take on the ground for people? Because I remember when I was young and going to Expos games, and there was that big talk about building that stadium downtown, and that was talked about for quite a few years, and then it never happened. I believe that was during the Jeffrey Loria years that there was a lot of talk about that. What is the take with the people of Montreal about bringing the Expos back?
It's generally very positive. I mean, you know, once we get into the history, which you're about to do, it's understandable that there's a sort of sour taste in people's mouths and a lot of skepticism because of the way, you know, the way Major League Baseball is constructed in terms of revenue and the gaps between teams and stuff like that, and also because of, you know, the differences in culture and all that stuff. But I think again, and one of the biggest surprises is how much people have embraced this idea that people will that we could possibly get a team and the support. And like you said, it really kind of went that next level in 2014 where we had that first exhibition game. I think it was against the Mets. Yep. And I think, Matthew, you'd agree that there was a lot. I remember a lot of people saying, yeah, they'd be lucky to get 25 to 30,000. Who's going to go watch the Blue Jays in a completely irrelevant game? Blue Jays, Toronto, our ultimate, you know, town rival. Why would we go and support the Blue Jays? And I remember that weekend, it was kind of the pinnacle of, wow, you know, this is a legit possibility. And, you know, just seeing the Big O, which we hadn't watched a baseball game in you know, 10 years at that time, completely full to the rafters. And I remember running into a couple of dudes in full Blue Jays gear. They couldn't speak a word of English. They were French dudes, you know, and I was talking to them in French, and they were like, yeah, go Blue Jays. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, we have legit baseball fans here that I couldn't even have imagined. If you had told me that would have happened, I would have been, nah, that's not true. So I think I've even been surprised. I was the one telling other people, like, you have no idea. There is actually a legit, you know, hardcore group of baseball fans here that's bigger than people realize. And the proof has been there in the past 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, the games early on, they had incredible crowds. And then Major League Baseball's collective bargaining agreement then put the games on Monday, Tuesday nights, which was a huge, you know, downturn. And that combined with teams like Pittsburgh and Milwaukee, and they weren't as big a draws as, you know, when they were getting 50,000. But my favorite stat, and I remember a Canadian press writer by the name of Fred Daigle on the French side wrote this, you know, one of the preseason games a couple of years ago had 25,000 fans on a Monday night. And people were saying, oh, see, it's not 50,000 anymore. But around Major League Baseball that night, of all the preseason games, it was third most attended. The only two that beat it were LA, the Angels against the Dodgers, and the Giants against the A's, drawing on 2 different fan bases. And it had even beaten the defending champion Astros in their first preseason game at home. So, you know, this is in March, obviously, when the weather's still, you know, snowy outside. So it's been a really amazing, eye-opening thing, these preseason games, and they've always coincided with some kind of fun pre-game ceremony honoring the past of the Expos, whether it's the '94 Expos or Tim Raines or Vladimir Guerrero or Pedro Martinez one year against the Red Sox. So there's always been something fun happening here, and it's given us a lot of credibility. I think it's John McHale Jr. I'm not sure of his title with MLB. Annakin may remember it, but he's maybe a special to the assistant or something to the commissioner, and he came to file a report the first few years on what the atmosphere was like here. And it's really noteworthy that it was him, because his dad was the first president of the Expos, and so he was quite favorable and surprised as to what the fan base was turning out and accomplishing here. And there were some Blue Jay fans coming in and some fans from out of town, but I think Annakin would agree, most of it was people here in Montreal, which was pretty cool.
I want to jump into Expos history in general. When I think of the Expos, I think of that 94 team, a team that I believe if they didn't go on strike as far as Major League Baseball, that's a team that could have been a World Series bound team or even won the World Series in general. When you guys think of the Expos, do you think of that team as far as, the start of the Expos history, or do you think of before that team, there's, other teams that you also think are great Expos teams even before the 94 team?
Well, my first experience going to games was I'm 42 now. So when I first started going to games, going to see those early 80s teams, I was still really young, but I remember how much of an impact it had on me, not only the players themselves, because André Dawson and Gary Carter in particular, and Tim Raines and, other guys, more obscure guys like Charlie Lee and Steve Rogers and Cromartie to a certain extent. They were really larger than life characters, and just their uniforms, that sort of that bright kind of popping red, white, and blue that they used to wear, the logo, which was so, it's so particular. I remember it having a huge impact on me. So, not really understanding the game and not really understanding the history of baseball, the experience of going to the Big O and watching those players it's definitely sealed into my brain. And Carter is still my favorite player in Expos history. But in my formative years, where I was a teenager, I was 16 in 1994. So, that's when you're listening to the music that you're super intense about, and you're discovering all of the arts and, high school and all that. And just having that Expos team kind of peak at that time during my formative years, I mean, there's no way I can get around not thinking about 94 almost instantly. But I think it is it's kind of a half and half. I don't know, Matthews might disagree, but I think of both, and you have two different uniforms to represent both those teams, which makes it kind of convenient as well. So 94, early 80s, to me, they're almost equally as important.
Yeah, they changed their uniforms to the pinstripes at home in 1992, which coincided with Felipe Alou taking over in May of that year. So yeah, you're right. It's really quite convenient to have the two different, uniforms. I'm exactly the same age as Annakin. So it's the same kind of, thing for me. I remember early 80s going to games and my dad taking me to game. Even I think he was a season ticket holder for a few years. So, I got to see the old timers games as well. The second baseman was Vance Law, but his dad, Vern Law, was a Major League Baseball player. And I remember, it was so cool. My dad's pointing out that it's pregame and these guys in their 40s and 50s are playing this old timers game. And here comes Vance Law out of the dugout to play with his dad for a few minutes. And, so there was a lot of just fun, family, kind of cool little stories in the early 80s. And you mentioned the uniforms and the characters and, Pascual Perez, all these crazy, and, it seemed like Montreal had more characters than other franchises for whatever reason, maybe because of the culture difference, and they had to stand out a little more to make their mark in where they were located. But for 94 specifically, I've mentioned this before and publicly, but I think, when they changed the uniforms in 92, part of it was because people in the late 80s, early 90s started to think of the Expos, the uniforms as kind of pajamas and outdated, and now they're retro cool. But, and it wasn't cool for teenagers to like it. The Habs had won the Stanley Cup in 93, and they were a good team. And when the Expos had Felipe Alou and Marquise Grissom and Delano DeShields and Larry Walker and all these guys, Alou, and they became this fast, cool team that played, without with reckless abandon, and it was all of a sudden cool again to be an Expos fan. And you started to see in '93, like the jerseys and the hats started to get out there, and then the strike hit, and it just wiped all of that away. And a good, just based on anecdotal and some small research, about 20% of the fan base never came back. Never came back to games at the Olympic Stadium after the '94 strike. And it really became the beginning of the end for the Expos. The next year, imagine, in that off season, they don't sign Larry Walker, so they lose their cleanup hitter and right fielder. They trade their closer, John Wetland, in the same off season, right? You lose your closer. 2 years later, is the World Series MVP, right? Their ace, Ken Hill, same off season, he's gone too. And he goes to the Indians, I think, or St. Louis, back to St. Louis postseason right away. Marquise Grissom, they get rid of their starting center fielder and leadoff hitter, and he wins the World Series with the Braves in '95.
The last out, even. He couldn't.
What's that?
The last out of that World Series.
Yes,
too.
yes. And all of that happened in the same offseason, 1994, so the spring of '95. So all of it got wiped out, and it was a completely different team in '95, which was a last place team. And, '96, they miraculously, competed. But, I mean, it wasn't the same. And, that was one of the things that ExposNation tried to do, was educate the public on what happened, why fans stopped going. And we have an article up that's got a ton of views over the years, which explains this, the getting rid of Alou, getting rid of Pedro, no stadium deal, the new owners tanking the franchise, all these things, and you look at Atlanta and Cleveland, you're younger than us, but if you look at the history there in the early '90s, the Braves were getting 2,000 fans. Cleveland was getting 3,000 fans. Same thing could have happened here.
Yeah. So you kicked a lot of stuff around, great topics, and I do want to get into that, Matt. But first, let's talk about one thing. Now, you said about they did that analysis that 20% rather of the fans never came back. Why do you feel like that was?
Well, '95, they were a last place team, right? They got rid of all those players I mentioned in the same offseason. So it was a completely different team in '95, or mostly. And people just looked at it and said, we've suffered long enough. We've never been to the postseason other than 1981, and we had heartbreak in 1981. It's been year after year of futility. We finally culminate to this big championship caliber team, and it's gone. We know what's going to happen next. They'll never be able to afford players. Baseball's changing. F it. And that's basically, I think, what happened is a lot of people anyway, the casual fans said, yeah, I'm not going to invest my heart in this anymore. The hardcore stayed, but the casual fans went, yeah, the writing's on the wall.
But do you guys feel like that team would have won the World Series like everybody speaks about?
Well, I mean, it's completely hypothetical.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
They could have got eliminated in the first round. Like, who knows? but I mean, they were certainly a superpower team. And if you look back at them now, there's 2 Hall of Famers now on that team. And, you look at the almost guys like, Moises Alou, if you look at his numbers and you see some of the guys that have gone in lately, like Harold Baines and Ted Simmons and guys like that, you see somebody like Moises Alou and you're like, why can't he be in the Hall of Fame? And they were both they were all performing at their peaks. Walker was about to set the record for doubles that year. A lot of people don't remember that. He was on pace to shatter that record. Alou was, I believe, near the top of the batting title. I think he was in the lead.
Yeah. Ken Hill had a shot at 20 wins.
Yeah.
And the other funny thing is there were 5 All-Stars on that '94 team, including Alou hitting the game-winning hit in the All-Star game. And actually, I think Grissom tied it in the 9th inning, right off Randy Johnson.
Grissom hit a homer off Johnson, yeah.
Yeah. So they had 5 All-Stars, and Larry Walker wasn't even one of the All-Stars on that team in 1994, which, if you can believe it, that's how crazy that team was. Pedro was. Exactly. Pedro as well. So maybe, but it's funny. I've interviewed Tim Raines, and he said, well, I was on the White Sox that year, and we were in first place, and I think we would have, been there too. And I interviewed Tim Wallach, and he said, well, Dodgers, we were pretty good too at that point. So, there's a lot of people that have their own opinions, but there really wasn't any weakness. And the other kind of indicator, what was their record down the stretch? Do you remember, Annakin? They won. It was an insane record, like 20-4 or something like that in their last like 25 games or something.
Well, I think the major indicator of how strong they were was the fact that the Atlanta Braves won the division for 15 years in a row, most of the time without much competition. And here we are in August, and the Expos are 6 games ahead of them. So that tells you a lot right there. That super-powered 1995 team that won the World Series, the Atlanta Braves, the year before were 6 games behind the Expos. So I think that kind of tells you how hot they were and how powerful they were at that time.
And they were under 500 in May.
Right. And so if you say, well, the Braves won in 95 and the Expos were 6 games ahead of them, then it's very possible the Expos would have won in 94, right?
Right. I want to kick this around too, because we hear a lot of this stuff from, I guess, people that aren't really as, baseball fans as you guys are. My thing is with the Expos after that night, and you talked about this, Matt, just recently in the conversation, we saw that the Expos, they got rid of all those players. Was that because, and I'm not sure if, and you can educate me or correct me if I'm wrong, I guess I should say, if this is the case, either one of you guys, Annakin too. Was Jeffrey Loria the owner at that time? When they got rid of?
No, in '94 was a consortium of a bunch of different owners. Claude Brochu was the president and the managing partner of the Expos. He had been with the team when the original owner, Charles Bronfman, sold it in around, I think it was 91. Jeffrey Loria didn't come into the picture until I think it was 99, if I'm not mistaken. And then he sold the team to Major League Baseball in 2002.
But when was the fall, I guess, not the nail in the coffin, but with the start of the fall of the Expos, do you feel like it was that 95 year?
Well, they had struggled with attendance. We're forgetting the one big element in the decline of the Expos was the stadium itself. So a lot of people don't talk about that. And this is something that I say to people who kind of criticize the fans. They built that thing. There's a whole story about the Olympic Stadium that would take, that's a whole other podcast about how it was built, how irresponsibly it was built, how it's linked to corruption within the construction culture in Montreal. There's a whole big kind of, infrastructure angle to the story of the Olympic Stadium. But the fact is, in 1991, a large piece of concrete fell off the stadium while the Expos were on the road. But if that piece of concrete had fallen during a home game, it would have killed people because it was near where the wicket windows are, where you go and get your tickets or pick them up. So if that had happened during a game, people would have died. So basically, they moved a bunch of home games to where, I don't know where they ended up playing all their home games.
Yeah. They were a last place team in 91.
91, right? This happened, I think, we believe in 91. They're last place team, so they ended up playing the rest of their games on the road. So what I tell people is like, this was a big story. Would you take your kids to an Expos game knowing that chunks of concrete are falling off the stadium? And it had a huge psychological effect, I think, on the fan base that is actually not even mentioned that much because I think it was just kind of known. It's a piece of garbage, that stadium. You don't want to go to it. And I'm even not even counting the sort of atmosphere, which was, it was
cavernous.
Cavernous is a great word. A lot of people don't even know what it's like to go to another stadium, but I've been to many stadiums, and it's really insane how much of a difference it is when you go to those games. I think you'll agree, Matthew, like growing up, we loved the place because we knew nothing else, but I've been to games in Anaheim, I've been to Dodger Stadium, and Fenway and on all these places. And it's just
PNC Park, my favorite.
Right. So I think really the decline, it really went fast after that 91 season. And that's compounded by the fact that in 89, only 2 years before, it was another one of those heartbreaking, end of season things where they traded for Mark Langston in midseason. because they were battling for first place, or they were already in first place, but it was really close. And they looked like a team that was ready to go into the postseason and do some damage. They ended up trading Randy Johnson, who was nothing at the time, for Mark Langston. And Mark Langston played well, but the team kind of just, they kind of fizzled out at the end. And it was a big year. It was like one of those, 87, we didn't quite do it. Those early 80s teams failed. And 89 was the big thing. And Charles Bronfman, who had been the owner since 69, sold the team right after that year, kind of giving up on the franchise. And I think the fans kind of gave up at the same time. And like you say, you throw that Olympic Stadium thing in there, and then the 94 was the nail in the coffin. I think 94 was the nail in the coffin. Some people, I still went to games after. The 96 team we talked about was a really inspiring team. 2003, they made a run late in the year for the wild card. You probably remember that, Rob, because that's kind of the teams that you remember. Right. 2003 was a really exciting year, especially at the end in September. And so, but I really think 94 was kind of like, it was almost the end. And then 94, for anybody who was already on their way out, they're like, well, like Matthew says, that
you just kept chipping at the fan base. And we mentioned Claude Brochu, and he, publicly started to talk in the 90s, in the mid 90s, 96, 97, about how they needed a new stadium publicly, and how this was no longer a viable Major League Baseball stadium. So he kept repeating that mantra in the public. This is not a Major League Baseball stadium. We need a new stadium. So it's like when you get beaten with the same facts, say, oh yeah, it's true. Why am I going to these games? It's not a Major League Baseball stadium. And they had the plans and they tried to get the stadium done. It didn't happen, but just methodically, all of these little things just continued to, eat away, erode at the fan base without any kind of positive thing. And when Laurier came in, it was very exciting, and people were very, enthused. And the 2000, I think it was 2000, the opening day, and theatrics and all these things, and it wasn't, 2000, if you can imagine, Rob, the owners came in and said, you know what, we don't like this radio deal. So they put Dave Van Horn, the voice of the Expos from 1969 until 2000. The year 2000, he was on internet radio. There was no English broadcast of the team on radio, only on internet radio in the year 2000, if you can imagine. Right. So that was one of the things they did pretty quick after jumping in, and it really kind of fell apart from there.
You see similarities between the Rays and the Expos, and the Rays had some good years too. They went to the World Series, lost to the Phillies, but we see that same talent as far as coming up through the Rays farm system, as we saw through the Expos too with their farm system. Do you guys see the same thing there, similarities?
Yeah, I think it's super ironic that we're so linked to them now because of this idea that we would share a season with them. Because for sure, and you look at, there's so many similarities even beyond the kind of the amazing farm system that we've had, that we had the privilege of having for 35 years. That I've been lucky because of this whole movement to be around a lot of, inside baseball people, from scouts to GMs to, the players themselves, and talking to them. And really, that's the one constant you hear about the history of the Expos. Like, man, did they produce some great players. And of course, that always leads to the inevitable, but they didn't get to hold on to them. And they ended up doing kind of their best work with other teams. And you're seeing that a bit with Tampa now. They managed to do something this year that right. For the second time, that we never managed to do, which was make the big show. But there's definitely that similarity, and of course the way that their Tropicana field is talked about is the exact same sort of narrative that the Big O was talked about. And so there's and the discussions of whether Tampa Bay is a baseball city, does baseball work in Florida, all those same discussions we had to have. The only glaring similarity, the glaring difference, which I always point out, which is, you would see Tampa going down the stretch competing for the playoffs in recent years, where they were struggling to fill the place, and they were struggling. There was still, within the teens of attendance, 12,000 to 18,000. And I don't care if you ever went to if you were ever in Montreal during a September or August playoff run by the Expos, you know that we would fill that place. And that sort of fever, that Expos fever, which was one of the slogans they'd always have, which would take over the town in those days, August, from 1993, 1994, 1996, even though, like I said, that 2003, it took over the city, and Tampa, it just doesn't seem to happen. I mean, we'll never get to know now because of the situation with the virus, but I wonder how the attendance would be. Obviously the World Series, you would think the place would be sold out, but I mean, leading up to this now, how would it have been?
I mean, I don't think it would be sold out. I think there would be a good size of fans as far as people being there, being in Florida, going to those games, being at that stadium. I honestly don't. I think they would get 20 some odd thousand fans, and that would, be good for them. My thing is, and I heard this argument too a lot with the Expos, saying that the Expos were in the wrong division as far as being in the NL East, that they should have been in the AL East. We look at the Yankees, the Red Sox. If you put the Expos in there and you take out maybe, I don't know, either Baltimore or Tampa Bay, regardless. Obviously, this is more toward, the 90s and, going down the line. Tampa Bay came in, I believe, 97. But if you had the Expos in that AL East with those surrounding teams with Boston and New York,
and the Blue Jays,
Expos, you'd get more attendance. You'd get people there, and people would travel consistently like they did. Even like I said, I did, from Boston, Rhode Island, Vermont, Massachusetts to Montreal, as they would from New York if the Yankees were in that division. What do you guys think about that argument as far as drawing people and bringing that excitement more so than playing? I know Atlanta was great during the 90s. You look at Tom Glavine, Greg Maddux, and that gang, but those teams besides the Mets, rather, none of those teams were really around Montreal. They were all kind of far away.
Yeah, I think that, in the 80s, like you mentioned, we always see buses up here outside the Olympic Stadium coming up from upstate New York or Vermont or, but those were basically for the Mets games. That was it. When Boston came here a couple of times for interleague play, it was crazy the amount of fans that came up for that. It's a 4.5 hour, 5 hour drive. So you didn't even mention the Blue Jays in the same division as well. That natural rivalry too, a 1 hour flight or a 3 hour train ride or, whatever the case may be. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. But at this point, I think that, all indications are that even if they win the World Series, that Tampa Bay is going to split a team here and with Montreal, that they've exhausted all resources down there, that they don't have the corporate support to allow Tampa Bay to play, 81 home games in that market. But at the same time, it's still a large TV market. And so it's worth keeping. And you're in Florida. And so you could have spring training plus the first half of the year there, one residence, and then for the players, and then the rest here. I think, from that perspective, you talk about it as it would have been better back in the day. But I think that's the plan now is to have a Tampa Montreal team playing against Toronto, the Yankees, the Red Sox for a ton of their home games.
But to push back against that, Matt, wouldn't it be kind of foolish for Montreal to build a new stadium, spend all that money for only like 3 months of baseball a year?
Well, it's 40 games instead of 81 games. The Montreal Canadiens play at the Bell Center for 40 games a year.
True, fair
the
point.
Local ownership has said here that, making baseball work is tough. Making baseball work half the year in the summer months when the weather is great, if we only had to play in, late June, July, August, early September, it's like, good Lord, a lot easier buy-in. And, instead of the players going in January, February to spring training and then going to, another city, here it's January, February, March, April, May, June, and then Montreal the rest of the time. I don't know if Annakin, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think that the general feeling about ownership is that that's what they would rather. I think they're more nervous of the idea of trying to fill that stadium for 80 games rather than 40 games. I think for it to work in Montreal with a 162 game schedule, you have to kind of, it's almost like you have to pick up where you left off in the best times, like you need to have those Expos, marketed the way that we think about them. You have to play off the kind of nostalgia of the whole thing. And I think that's probably not ever going to happen because expansion is a really expensive thing. I think there's a lot of talk now because of this virus that, Major League Baseball is going to be more inclined to try to get that expansion. But I'm not sure how viable that is for Montreal. So I think that they see this kind of split season thing as the best option. And, if it is, I think you'll only be able to tell once it actually happens. And you can't kind of like market test that whole thing. You just gotta do it and see how it turns out, because it's untested in the history of sports.
No, I hear you. It just doesn't seem, and maybe it's just because I'm, maybe I'm thinking not outside the box. I just feel like it's just not going to work.
Well, it's tough, right? Because it's like you said, it's not been done before. It's a matter of what the players
like. What would they call the team? You know what I mean? Like the Tampa.
It's a great question. It's a great question, and
I fear the like you could look at it from a attendance. Well, yeah, it's easier to fill the stadium, 40 games, but you could also take the other angle, which is, but are you going to fill the stadium when you, like you said, Rob, like you're sort of dividing loyalties amongst two teams? And is that even possible? Is it even possible to drum up loyalty and passion for a team that you're splitting with another city? I don't know, to be honest.
It depends. It depends on marketing. From the owner's perspective, look, they want to compete, right? They have to get rid of their players all the time. So if they have two markets, they got two TV deals.
I just don't see it working as even on the Rays end, because right now the team is in the World Series and we have the pandemic, and Florida's in shambles as far as the pandemic. It's a disaster down here, but that's besides the point. We were not seeing people even in 2008 when they went to the World Series against the Phillies going to games. People, I feel like you'll have a better chance of, in Montreal, of drawing people to the games there because of what we saw, rather than in Tampa Bay, because this is 2 winning years now. I discount this year because it's the pandemic, but even in 2008, when you had guys like Evan Longoria and you had a lot of other All-Stars on that team, they didn't go to the games either. So, and with Tampa, and I'll end with this, the stadium is way out of the city of Tampa. You have to drive like another 30, 40 miles to get from the city. Yeah, and over the bridge, right, to get to that stadium. And for people that get out of work at 4 or 5 o'clock to go to a 7:05 start, they do not want to do that. They are not going to do that. And they've shown it many times throughout the years since the Rays existed, since 97, that they have not had sold-out games consistently. So, if you're going to move the team or do that, I think it's just better off you send it to Montreal altogether. You're splitting it with the Rays. And I'm not saying it just because you guys are in Montreal. I'm just saying in general. They don't draw it down here. People don't give a damn about baseball in Tampa. And the only way they would maybe get, think about it, is if they built that stadium downtown near where the Tampa Bay Buccaneers play for football. Otherwise, I don't see any kind of fan base really attending those games. And I'll leave it there. If you guys got anything to say, maybe you disagree before we end the interview.
I mean, obviously for me, that's what I would want. I want to embrace it. And that's where most of the doubt is, right? People, people say it like you, like, are we really going to support this kind of two-pronged team? But yes, of course. But I think at the end of the day, we'll only know that for sure in 2028 when the lease is up on the Tropicana Park. And I think, listen, I'm not going to speak for the ownership group because I don't know what they really think, but you have to think that this is a means to that end, right? That, we're going to split we're going to have a split team and we'll see what happens. But really at the end of the day, they want to show that Montreal is clearly a way better option than Tampa.
Agreed.
And
Right. And sorry to interrupt you, Annakin, but you brought up a good point, and it's going to be, I feel like what you just said is what's going to happen. They'll do the split for maybe a year or two or a couple of years. They'll show that Montreal is viable, and they'll just send the team over there and cancel it all out, like you said, in 2028. Kind of like what they did with the Expos in Puerto Rico. Obviously, they did. They didn't go to Puerto Rico. They went to Washington.
From what I hear, it's completely legit. This is what they want to do. They want a Canadian TV deal. They want a U.S. TV deal. They want to not have games when it's freezing. The temperature literally is at the frozen point in early to mid-April. And I think that I'm nervous too about 81 games being sold and the optics of it on a Wednesday night in early May. If people are going to go to games, I'd rather not worry about that. I'm not going to go to that games in early May. So I think they're really trying to move this thing forward in this way. Tampa's a Yankees market. It always has been because of spring training. Right. So I get that. But I just think that the TV deal is the biggest thing for them, and one of the things, and I think that will always want them down there.
Well, we'll disagree and end with that as we go, because I know we got a roll here. Can you guys, both of you guys, tell people where they can find more about you and ExposNation in general?
ExposNation.com is our website. Way out of date, but not a lot going on right now, so we'll update it at some point. Facebook.com/ExposNation, and obviously ExposNation on Twitter. Matthew Words for me, and
yeah, at Annakin Slayd on Twitter. We didn't really get to talk about what I do, but the reason I joined ExposNation, became a part of it, was because I made these sort of anthems about the Expos. One is called Remember, and it was sort of kind of been the anthem of the rejuvenation of the Expos. So you can see that on my YouTube site, Annakin Slayd. And yeah, I'm on Twitter at Annakin Slayd.